December 7th, 1941. The date that lives in infamy. Except in our timeline, it doesn't just live in infamy, it lives in absolute catastrophe. Because today, we're not talking about the Pearl Harbor that merely crippled the Pacific Fleet. We're talking about the Pearl Harbor that ended it. Completely. And then, just for good measure, Imperial Japan decided to stick around and take the whole archipelago. So buckle up, because we're about to watch the entire Pacific balance of power flip upside down, inside out, and then catch fire. Here's what actually happened. Japan's surprise attack on Pearl Harbor killed 2,403 Americans, wounded 1,178 more, destroyed over 180 aircraft, and sank or damaged multiple battleships. Devastating, yes. War ending? Not even close. Because sitting somewhere out in the Pacific that morning were 3 American aircraft carriers that just happened to be elsewhere: Enterprise, Lexington, and Saratoga. The backbone of the fleet survived. Japan scored a tactical victory, but missed the strategic knockout. But what if they hadn't? What if those carriers were sitting ducks at dock? What if the attack wasn't just successful? It was flawless. And what if Tokyo decided that sinking ships wasn't enough, that they needed to plant the rising sun flag right on Waikiki Beach? Let's set the stage properly. By late 1941, Japan was suffocating. American, British, and Dutch oil embargoes were strangling the empire's war machine. Tokyo faced a choice: bow to Western demands and abandon their ambitions in China and Southeast Asia, or roll the dice on war. Diplomacy wasn't just failing, it was already dead and buried. The Imperial Japanese Navy and Army, perpetually competing for resources and glory, both agreed on one thing. The U.S. Pacific Fleet stationed at Pearl Harbor was the single greatest obstacle to Japan's expansion. Remove it, and the entire resource-rich region from Malaya to the Dutch East Indies lay open like a buffet. So Admiral Yamamoto planned his masterstroke: cripple the Americans so badly that by the time they recovered, Japan would have an impregnable defensive perimeter across the Pacific. Except in this timeline, cripple becomes obliterate.
Picture this. All 3 carriers are in port. Every single one. The Japanese strike force doesn't just hit the battleships, they systematically annihilate the carrier fleet, the repair facilities, the fuel depots, everything. Then comes the second wave, but it's not just bombers this time, it's troop transports. Japan doesn't stop at destruction, they invade. Within days, Hawaii, the unsinkable fortress, the front wall of America's Pacific strategy, falls. And just like that, the entire strategic order in the Pacific inverts. Hawaii transforms from America's forward base into Japan's springboard. Instead of defending the Marshall and Gilbert Islands, Tokyo now pushes its defensive perimeter thousands of miles eastward, right into the middle of the Pacific. The Americans, they're forced to pull their entire supply line back to San Diego and San Francisco, adding thousands of miles to every operation. It's not just a setback, it's a complete strategic reversal. Now let's talk about what this means for the region, because the ripple effects are immediate and brutal. Australia and New Zealand suddenly find themselves in what military strategists politely call strategic isolation, and what everyone else calls utterly screwed. Historically, Hawaii served as the bridge protecting Australia from Japanese aggression. With Hawaii in Japanese hands, the supply routes to Australia become a gauntlet running through the South Pacific, long, exposed, and vulnerable. Britain, already stretched thin across Europe and North Africa, can't provide meaningful protection. Australia becomes a potential target, at minimum facing serious strategic pressure from an empire that now controls the Central Pacific like a chessboard. But here's where the numbers start to tell the real story. Japan just scored the greatest military victory in its history. Morale in Tokyo skyrockets. The greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere suddenly looks less propaganda and more like manifest destiny. Thailand, Burma, potentially even parts of India start eyeing Tokyo's orbit. Britain, the Netherlands, and France in Asia shift to purely defensive postures. Japan gains maybe 1 to 2 years before America can mount any serious counteroffensive. That's 1 to 2 years of unopposed expansion, resource extraction, and defensive fortification. But here's the problem, and it's a big one. Japan just picked a fight with the one nation on Earth that absolutely, categorically refuses to lose.
Let's talk industrial capacity, because this is where reality crashes into Japanese ambition like a fully loaded Essex-class carrier. In 1942, America produced approximately 49,000 aircraft. Japan managed about 9,000. Over the entire war, the U.S. churned out 325,000 planes versus Japan's 76,000. From late 1942 through 1945, America commissioned 26 new fast aircraft carriers. Japan built 8. 8! This isn't a competition, it's an execution. Losing Hawaii doesn't change America's industrial base, it just makes Washington very, very angry. Suddenly, the U.S. Navy goes all in on carrier-centric doctrine faster than in our timeline, building floating air bases at a rate that would make any sane logistics officer weep. The entire Pacific Fleet relocates to California, which looks like retreat, but is actually just America taking a few steps back to wind up for the haymaker. Meanwhile, Japan's sitting on Hawaii, and reality starts to sink in. Holding an island archipelago 2,000 miles from your nearest base while facing an enemy with functionally infinite industrial capacity isn't strategy, it's suicide with extra steps. Every tanker, every transport, every supply ship to Hawaii is vulnerable. The defensive perimeter may have expanded, but so did the resource drain. And America isn't negotiating, they're not even considering it. Retaking Hawaii becomes the Normandy of the Pacific, a massive amphibious operation that dwarfs Guadalcanal. The U.S. would throw 2 to 3 times the resources at it, and that's a conservative estimate. The war, instead of ending in 1945, drags into 1947 or even 1948, because now America has to literally retake the islands one by one, mile by bloody mile. But let's zoom out to the global picture, because that's where things get truly weird. With America pouring 70% or more of its naval budget into reclaiming the Pacific, support for Europe necessarily drops. Lend-Lease supplies to the Soviet Union via Pacific routes slow to a trickle. Stalin's forces still probably grind Germany down, but it takes longer and costs more. Chiang Kai-shek's nationalists in China, already barely holding on, face potential collapse without American supply lines through the Pacific. If China falls faster, Japan consolidates control over East Asia much more thoroughly. Then the atomic bombs come, because they always come, and Japan finally capitulates, but weaker, later, and having cost America exponentially more blood and treasure. The post-war order looks nothing like our timeline. Japan still loses because industrial mathematics are undefeated, but the cost reshapes everything. America emerges more damaged, more cautious, possibly less willing to play global policeman. The Soviet Union, having borne even more of the European burden, might be stronger in relative terms. China's civil war plays out differently with the weakened or collapsed nationalist government, and somewhere in an alternate 1950, historians argue whether Japan's greatest victory was also its most catastrophic mistake. Spoiler alert, it absolutely was. Holding Hawaii just meant a slower, more agonizing defeat, like winning a fistfight by grabbing a tiger's tail. So what's the lesson here? Sometimes the greatest victory is just a really elaborate way of losing harder. Japan could have taken Hawaii, held it for years, and still faced the fundamental problem. They started a war they had no mathematical possibility of winning. All they did was make the ending more expensive for everyone. If this speculative disaster has taught you anything, hit subscribe, because next week we're simulating what happens when someone else makes catastrophically bad decisions. History. It's like watching a car crash in slow motion, except the car is on fire, and so is everything else.